There are only two genders, male and female.
How do we affirmatively make the case for trans people having the right to exist?
And how many genders there were in 2021? 72!
It's a heated debate with hardened battle lines.
Do I look like a male or a female to you? It's a trick question. I'm intersex.
Il gender non è Europa.
Some cultures have acknowledged more than two genders for thousands of years. Trans people exist. Trans kids exist in your school.
The gender debate has become a political issue. There's talk of a culture war, of left-wing woke ideology. But is this really a modern phenomenon? On the contrary, a look at history shows that many cultures have long recognized more than two genders. The topic is anything but new. We won't resolve the conflict with this video, but we can help you better understand the discussion. How is gender defined? In which countries is a third gender officially recognized? And which indigenous cultures have their own ideas about gender roles? The term gender gets thrown around a lot and is often used interchangeably with the word sex, which is where the confusion often begins. The two words, in fact, have distinct meanings. Sex refers to a person's biological sex, i.e. physical characteristics. Gender describes social gender, socially defined roles, expectations, and identities. This distinction between sex and gender became established in the middle of the 20th century. And although some people still don't differentiate, major governments, legal systems, and agencies do. The World Health Organization, for instance, has decided on the following definitions. Sex refers to the different biological and physiological characteristics of males and females, such as reproductive organs, chromosomes, hormones, etc. Gender refers to the socially constructed norms that impose and determine power, roles, and relationships between women, men, boys, girls, and trans and gender-diverse people, including people with non-binary gender identities. Gender norms, roles, and relations vary from society to society and evolve over time. And that's where it gets really interesting. Gender roles are not set in stone, they change. Let's take a closer look. First, an overview of the global situation. The legal recognition of more than two genders is regulated differently from country to country. In most places, there's no official third option in documents. But some countries have changed their laws since the early 2010s. There are now fewer than 20 countries that recognize a third gender nationwide. Let's zoom in on the world map. In large parts of Asia and Africa, a binary gender order prevails. Kenya is the only African country that recognizes intersex people as a third gender, but other non-binary gender identities are not recognized. In India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, a third gender is officially recognized. Nepal was a pioneer. It was the first country to decide that a third gender must be officially recognized, but the practical implementation came much later. In the United States, the situation is complicated and currently changing. Until now, the X option was available on passports. But immediately after President Donald Trump took office, he signed an executive order stating that the U.S. would only recognize two genders.
There are only two genders.
In South America, only a minority of countries have so far introduced uniform nationwide regulations on the recognition of a third gender. Exceptions include Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. There's also no consensus within Europe. Italy, Poland, and France, for example, do not recognize a third gender. In Spain, there's no uniform national regulation. In Denmark and Austria, however, there is. In Germany, you can have diverse entered in your passport or omit the gender marker completely. Other countries with the X option in passports are Australia and New Zealand. So clearly, it's complicated, with every country regulating recognition differently. How can you keep track of it all?
In our Western European culture, this binary gender system is more prevalent and has been for a relatively long time. But it's different in non-European cultures.
For more on that, let's look back at history.
I really believe there's been a great diversity of gender and sexuality on all continents, that all societies have integrated it. There are 800 local languages in Papua New Guinea, and in each of those languages there are terms for something between man and woman, and they're not even discriminatory. They don't place value judgments on it at all.
Long before our modern gender debate, indigenous communities had their own concepts of gender roles and identities. Here are some examples. In Juchitán, a city in the Mexican state of Oaxaca, there's still a large Muxe community today, a tradition celebrated even before colonization. The Muxes are a recognized third gender among the Zapotec people in Oaxaca, who maintain traditional dress, the Zapotec language, and other cultural traditions. Zapotec culture dates to the 6th century, and Muxes have always been a part of it. Once a year, a big festival is held in their honor.
Es una fiesta de la diversidad, es una fiesta de resistencia, es color, es luz y es una celebración a la vida también.
Muxes are usually assigned male at birth and take on traditionally female roles, but they cannot simply be equated with the Western concept of transgender. Their identity is culturally unique and closely linked to the Zapotec community.
Nosotras desde muy temprana edad identificamos nuestro lado femenino. Nos vestimos a los 10, 12, 13 años de mujeres. Y en la currícula escolares, en el sistema educativo, nosotras ya no podemos acceder a una escuela secundaria vestidas como mujeres. Por lo tanto, desercimos de la escuela.
Before colonization, early pre-Columbian civilizations had concepts of gender identity that went beyond the binary. That changed with the arrival of the conquistadors and Christian missionaries.
I believe religion does indeed play a major role, that the Christian religion has dictated and destroyed a great deal with its moral concepts. And it's the way power is exercised, of course. It really is the case that the binary is a tool of power.
Although Mexico has now legally recognized a third gender, the Muxes still encounter violence and discrimination in everyday life.
También se dice que en el Istmo de Tehuantepec es el paraíso Muxe, ¿no? Cuando realmente no lo es, porque también existe discriminación, existe la violencia y aún se falta trabajar mucho, ¿no? Para eliminar todo este tipo de tratos que hay hacia nosotras, ¿no?
Que estamos luchando por esto, para ser reconocidas, para ser aceptadas. Que en México, que en estas regiones, por lo menos Juchitán ya estemos no al 100%, hasta esto todavía. Así, aquí hacemos fiestas, aquí hacemos eventos, aquí hacemos trabajos. Aún seguimos siendo como que discriminadas.
Like the Muxes, similar communities in other parts of the world are also fighting for greater social recognition, despite their centuries-old history. A look at South Asia shows this clearly. Non-binary gender identities have a long tradition in Hindu society. There are references to what are called Hijras in scriptures dating back over 2,000 years. Hijra is a term used in Hindi and other South Asian languages to describe a distinct third gender identity, neither strictly male nor female. Today, Hijra is often used to refer to intersex or transgender people, but this falls short. Not all intersex or transgender people identify as Hijra, and vice versa.
transgender is gender identity, Hijra is a tradition. So we need to understand the thing clearly.
Modern concepts of gender fluidity do not necessarily coincide with traditional views in indigenous cultures. Traditionally, Hijras are associated with the Hindu goddess Bahuchara Mata, a goddess of fertility and purity. They were regarded as spiritual mediators and bestowers of blessings, and they were even worshipped as demigods in many regions. In the Mughal Empire, Hijras often held high social positions. That changed drastically with British colonial rule. In 1871, Hijras in India were classified as criminals by law, lost many rights, and were increasingly pushed to the margins of society. Almost 150 years later, Bangladesh officially recognized Hijras as a third gender. India's Supreme Court followed suit. Hopes this would improve their living conditions were high.
उन्होंने कहा किसी भी देश का उन्नति और डेवलपमेंट उसके ह्यूमन राइट्स से है, उनके इंसानों के हक से है। आज मर्द, औरत और थर्ड सेक्स या थर्ड जेंडर को किन्नरों को बहुत बड़ा हक दिया गया है, मानवीय अधिकार का हक दिया गया है।
Despite legal progress, social stigmatization remains a challenge, even a decade after official recognition.
আমি যে বাড়িতে থাকতাম আমার উপর অ্যাটাক করা হয়েছিল মাঝরাতে এবং সামহাউ আমি ওই অ্যাটেম্পটাকে আমি সার্ভাইভ করে যাই এবং তারপরে আরও একটা প্লটিং হয়েছিল আমাকে অ্যাসাসিনেট করার জন্য অনেক জায়গাতে আছে আমি রাস্তা দিয়ে যখন হাঁটছি আমি কোনো দোকানে যাচ্ছি তো অনেকে মনে করে বুঝতে পারি যে আমি একটা ট্রান্সজেন্ডার মেয়ে তো মনে করে যে আমি হয়তো টাকা উঠাইতে গেছি চাঁদা করতে গেছি বা এরকম কোনো কিছু এবং রাস্তা দিয়ে হাঁটতে গেলেও অনেক ধরনের হেনস্থার শিকার হতে হয় বুলিংয়ের শিকার হতে হয়
But Hijras and Muxes are by no means the only people who have historically challenged the binary gender system.
There are many cultures in North America, Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, in Polynesia, in Siberia, or among the Inuit in the Arctic, where, for example, if a family had no sons to go hunting, daughters were brought up as boys. And then they also had a special status as hunters in their families. That means that in non-European cultures there are very many, and I think also very old traditions of systems of more than just two genders.
Gender roles are not set in stone. Their manifestations are as diverse as the reasons for accepting or questioning them. Even in Europe, there are old traditions that break with gender norms. In the Balkans, for instance, there's the centuries-old tradition of the Burrneshas. These sworn virgins formally take on male identities in order to live according to the societal rules for men. One of the last Burrneshas lives in isolation in northern Albania.
Burrnesh vënosa mua bo, se na përpara ishim shumë të varfën, edhe nuk kishte kush për një mua non-stemme. Na ishim atë na 6 fëmijë, vllavi ma kam ka vdek, motra e madhe është martua. Atë na baba am kanë moshën 23 vjeçë kur baba më ka vdek, atë na vënosa, bona Burrnesh për me nimu ata.
The practice of Burrneshas goes back to the medieval common law of what was called kanun, in which men were traditionally placed above women. But Burrneshas were an exception. They were able to break out of the patriarchal structures.
Zgjedhja për të bërë Burrnesh sigurisht që është shumë e respektuar, shumë e nderuar dhe vlerësuar të themi, për faktin se një vajzë që heq dorë nga jeta e saj, nga jeta normale e një gruaje, që heq dorë nga funksioni i saj si grua për të martuar, për të patur një familje, për të patur fëmijët e saj, sigurisht është sakrifica më sublime që mund të bëjë dikush.
For centuries, becoming a sworn virgin was the only way for a woman to become the head of a family or to avoid an unwanted marriage.
Zgjedhja për të qenë Burrnesh nuk ka të bëjë fare në asnjë rast me seksualitetin, thjesht për të patur një status tjetër në shoqërinë e një periudhe të caktuar historiko-kulturore.
As the social status of women in Albania has changed, this tradition has become less important. As we said a while back, Gender norms, roles, and relations vary from society to society and evolve over time. And that's exactly what's happened here. Today, only a handful of Burrneshas still live in Albania. Okay, so what have we learned? Diverse gender roles have been negotiated in traditional indigenous cultures for centuries, certainly in contrast to today's debates on gender diversity. But a look at history shows that a strict two-gender order is neither universal nor uncontroversial. Biological sex and social gender are not necessarily the same thing. The two are often confused in current debates. Anyone who addresses this topic is treading on difficult ground. The question of whether there are more than two genders is inextricably linked to the question of who defines gender and with what consequences. Gender is always a social and cultural construct. We hope you enjoyed our historical background on the gender debate. Do you know of any other gender concepts from your own culture? Share your experiences in the comments.